Artificial intelligence is rapidly becoming embedded in American society, and many experts say it will be as life-changing as the internet, revolutionizing our economy and even our everyday lives. But there are huge concerns, and our guest today will address some of them, so stay with us.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people. Some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Coming to us today from Highland Park, Illinois is Michael Pickard, a prolific author who's had a successful career in information technology. And we're going to lean on that expertise for today's discussion. Michael's inspired by ideas. What isn't, what could be. Back in 1993, he started writing fiction when his daughter Samantha asked him to write daily letters to her at overnight camp. So he mailed her chapters of a story she could relate to. An alien who came to Earth and attended overnight camp. Guess whose camp? Her camp. Those letters continued every summer at her request. After 5 years, in fact, he'd accumulated enough material for his first novel. And then he couldn't stop writing. You can visit his catalog, and it's a catalog because there's a lot of stuff there, at www.gerflikefranknit.com. You'll find 9 novels, paperback and ebook, a collection of short stories, and even a children's book. We'll get him to fill us in on all of that later, but first we're going to talk about AI, which Michael calls machine learning systems, says he hates the term AI. A new Stanford University report makes this observation. As the technical barrier to entry for creating and deploying generative AI systems has lowered dramatically, the ethical issues around AI have become more apparent. The ethical issues. And noted Goldman Sachs last month, if generative AI lives up to its potential, up to 300 million jobs could be at risk in the U.S. and Europe, with legal and administrative professions the most exposed. So clearly there are many concerns, as there should be. Michael, welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast.
Good to be with you.
Hey man, before we get to your books, let's dive right into this, to your concerns about AI. First, tell us a little bit about your background and your expertise in technology.
I have been doing software professionally since 1971, when I graduated from Northwestern University with a bachelor's in mathematics and an unofficial minor in computer science. Because back in the Stone Age, Northwestern didn't have a computer science degree. But I took every computer science course there was, and I even invented some that the TAs that I worked alongside of at the computer center would teach. So I got a good, broad foundation for what goes on inside a computer in terms of software and what the limits were.
Excellent. Now, why is it that you let's just start with that. Why do you refuse to use the term artificial intelligence?
So the term has been misused so badly that if you ask someone what it is, a definitive definition, no one can give you one. And I really don't like amorphous phrases that don't carry some meaning. I think the English language should be more precise so that we can communicate. And if I use a phrase that can mean anything, I'm not really communicating with you. Are these systems artificial? Certainly, because it's software running on a piece of hardware, a computer typically. But I balk at the second word of the phrase. Because I don't believe that these systems are intelligent at all.
All right. So what are your concerns about how might be used and what dangers do you see?
I tripped over this topic when I heard a news report that the facial recognition systems that law enforcement was using were not recognizing African American faces. They were getting false hits on African American faces, but Caucasian faces were being processed very well. And I thought it was an interesting news report, so I dug into it, and I learned that the catalog of faces that trained the system did not include sufficient ethnicities so that those faces might be recognized. And it was clear to me that it may have been unintentional, but it was still inserting a bias, an unfortunate and unnecessary bias, in a law enforcement tool. And so I appreciated the identification of this flaw so much, I included it in one of my novels, a detective story where they can't recognize my protagonist's partner, who is African American. I've always had, even before I went to college, an interest in technology, and I follow technology as a hobby. So keeping up with how machines simulate intelligence has always been something on my radar.
I see. Okay. Now, in a note to me, you said people who build language models for these systems ignore aspects of ethics, garbage in, hatred out. Now, you said there is a fatal flaw in the current techniques underlying machine learning, and no one in the industry is stepping up to solve it or even talk about it. Can you explain what you're referring to there?
I'm not going to make this a tutorial on GPT systems or how they work, only to say that there are two phases. There's a phase where information is fed into a computer system and the system is taught based on that information. And so that's how it makes relationships, either between pictures or words or music. That's how the system will later operate to respond to a human. And the second part is the part that's getting all the press, which is being able to type in a prompt or a question and have the computer software, the machine learning model, give a response that the human processes as intelligent. The problem is, in my view, that the information that's being loaded into these systems that are training the systems are just raw data. So it's news articles and websites and who knows what else. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of quality step in the process of training the system in the first place. So if you include things in what is training this software that can eventually generate nasty stuff on the outbound side, that's why some of these chat systems that were brought online and were fed from Facebook as they're learning turned immediately hostile, nasty, and biased because they were fed with garbage. So I think and in my note to you, I said that no one is paying attention. Right. That was a little too specific. There are people who are dancing around the periphery of dealing with this. So it's not completely being ignored, but I think some of their efforts are misguided, and I can talk about that later.
What do you think needs to be done?
Computers are really good for repetitive tasks. And I think one of the things that should be done is to appropriately test the information that is being loaded to make sure that there aren't accidentally biased and and other bad stuff being loaded to train the machine. But I think that in the testing of these systems, they ought to push on the testing to see if they can uncover things that they may have missed. And I'm not sure that anybody is testing these things. They load it up, the software learns, and then they turn it loose. And all of us users of that software are the testers. I think that's wrong.
Yeah. Have you tried ChatGPT yet yourself?
I have nominally, not for my writing. I refuse to do that. Dabbled with it.
Right. Yeah.
But I've learned I don't have to stick my hand in a fire to know that I'm going to burn myself. Other people have gotten burned, and I will learn from them.
Okay. Yeah. Many companies are already racing to use this, quote, machine learning. And the Stanford survey said this: at its current developmental speed, research is moving on from generative AI to creating artificial general intelligence, according to 57% of researchers surveyed by Stanford. Artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is an AI system that can accurately mimic or even outperform the capabilities of a human brain. Now, that is no small statement, and it begs this question: should there be government regulations developed to protect against abusive, perhaps even criminal, behavior with this technology?
I'm not sure that inviting the government in is going to yield the result you want.
Okay.
Because of the way government works. I'm a bit of a skeptic. When I used to work at a corporate office and I went to one of the branch offices and said, I'm here from corporate to help you, people would laugh out loud and say, why don't you substitute the word government? I think that there is a false promise here. I'm not going to bore your listeners with how GPT systems work on the inside. I will mention a buzz phrase and they can look it up: neural networks. So they can spend an afternoon reading about neural networks.
Okay.
But that is what is created when you take all of this raw material and go through a learning process. Mm-hmm. The idea of a neural network is supposed to mimic or simulate, remember that word, simulate, how a human brain works. And so the thought for this particular technology is, and the hope in that quote, is that if we have sufficiently robust neural networks that we train from a huge variety of sources, and now they're into the tens or hundreds of billions of source documents that are being loaded to train systems, that these neural networks will process this information, learn something, and then be able to simulate intelligence to human beings. The flaw in that promise is that the intelligence doesn't come from the software. If you do a ChatGPT session and it generates some prose, and you look at it and you say, oh, that's pretty good writing. That's a pretty good answer. Mm-hmm. It's even helpful. Mm-hmm. The intelligence in dealing with that statement is coming from the human user who's viewing it as something useful. Mm-hmm. But the machine that generated it had no intelligence, not a bit, because all of these systems, using statistics and huge number crunching, associate all those words and phrases. And I want to quote from the article I saw this morning from the founder of Mathematica. It says that what GPT always fundamentally tries to do is reproduce a reasonable continuation of whatever text it's got so far. So It starts out with some words, and then it figures out what is a likely next word, and then a likely next word, and it strings them together and generates that as an answer. That's a mathematical, statistical process that a computer can do real well. It is not intelligence.
Now, are there any other points about this topic that you'd like to make before we switch over and focus a little bit about your books and what you've been doing?
Sure. I came across an article and I found it using Bing search, which has some GPT in it. Harvard University has an initiative called Embedded Ethics, and they're including philosophical concepts in their computer science courses so that students don't only ask, can I build it, but rather, should I build it, and if so, how? So that's putting ethics into the education of the next generation of software developers. And I think that's a good thing. I belong to something called Lunch Chat, 45-minute sessions that are arranged based on your interest. And so I've met people all over the world through Lunch Chat. And because I have machine learning as one of my topics, I get to meet a lot of people who are doing stuff with machine learning. And I ask them the following obnoxious question: how are you embedding ethics in the machine learning systems that you are deploying today? And when I ask that question, there is a long silence. And they talk around the edges of the question I asked, but none of them to date, not even one, has made any suggestions about how they could include ethical considerations or moral considerations in the systems that they are currently deploying. And that's what they're doing. They're rolling this stuff out. So if the people who are rolling it out don't know and are caught flat-footed about ethics in the systems they're rolling out, the more I got that answer, the worse I felt about the impact of these systems on the human population.
I don't know if driverless cars and driverless tractor trailer trucks are enabled through some form of AI. Are they?
Yes.
That scares the living you-know-what out of me, man, seeing an 18-wheeler coming down the road with nobody behind the wheel. How about you?
I guess as someone who wants the planet to be viable for my daughter and grandchildren, I should be looking at electric cars, but I don't want to turn over any aspect of driving to a machine algorithm. I'm just unwilling to do it. I've been around software too long. I've written major systems. I thought they were bug-free. We had tested them extensively. We deployed them, and then we started to get bug reports. So there was never anything that you could call perfect software. There will be flaws, always. You can't beat all the bugs out of software. And in this process, you're so far from any algorithm that you could debug. You have this engine that takes all this input and creates a neural net, and then the neural net responds. If there's a bad response, I read that one of the GPT instances said that 1 + 2 did not equal 3. Okay?
Yeah.
So if you bought a calculator and you tested it out and you did 1 + 2 = 3, and or you said 1 + 2 and you did not get the answer 3, you would take the calculator back to the manufacturer and say, this is flawed. It's not giving me the right answer. In machine learning systems, if you get some sort of answer that is inappropriate or just plain wrong, and there have been some of those too, how do you debug those? There is no entree to the algorithms that generated the answer. When I talk to these machine learning folks and I ask my second obnoxious question, which is, when you get an answer, can you ask the system, how did you come up with that answer? And their response is, all it would do is just generate a bunch of tables of statistics. But it can't tell you how it came up with the answer. It can just show you the inner workings of the stats and neural network. So debugging these things is problematic.
So you're saying that electric cars have some form of AI built within them, and that worries you?
Absolutely.
What I don't understand what it is that AI is related to with an electric car. If I don't know it, probably a lot of people listening don't know it either. So what is it?
I think it's simply that the software in a self-driving car needs to look at the environment and make decisions based on what it sees.
Right.
So yesterday morning, I was going to make a left-hand turn.
Yeah.
The light was turning yellow. I was out in the middle of the intersection. Coming toward me was an SUV.
Okay.
I had to make the decision whether I thought the SUV was going to stop or go through the intersection. And if he was going to stop, I could go ahead and make my left turn. If he was going to barrel through, making the left turn would have caused my car to be broadsided.
Right.
So given how fast he was moving and thinking about the risk to my life, I decided to wait, and he barreled through the intersection on the yellow. It turned red as he was passing through, and on a red light in the middle of the intersection, I completed my left-hand turn. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you if the subtle nature of that situation would have been appropriately diagnosed by a piece of software running under the hood.
Yeah, I understand that's driverless cars, but I was just referring to regular electric vehicles. Is there a concern there too?
Much less. Because the human is in control.
Yeah, you're really, the only time I see that would come into effect is if you're trying to use one of the features that will do a parallel park for you or something like that.
Yeah, I have a relatively modern car that I call a computer on wheels.
Yeah.
Because everything is through touchscreen, and it warns me when it thinks I'm doing something wrong, even if I'm not doing something wrong.
Right.
And on occasion, with me behind the wheel, so I'm in charge, it will throw up a big red not symbol and apply the brakes. And there's nothing in front of me.
Really?
It's reacting to preventing me from crashing, but crashing into nothing. So I know the software is buggy.
Right.
I experienced the results of it. And that's with me in control. So
what kind of car is that?
It is a modern Volkswagen Golf.
A modern Volkswagen Golf. Okay. Alrighty then. Let's see. I want to hear about your books. You've got what, 8 or 9?
So the 10th one came out last month. It is my first murder mystery novel.
Yeah.
You were right. Up to that point, I was doing sci-fi novels. I'm really comfortable in the sci-fi genre.
Okay.
But I wanted to test my skills at a murder mystery.
All right. What's the name of it?
It is called Creative Deductions Home Run.
Okay, I saw the cover for that. Talk about it.
Okay.
Shameless plug here, man.
I appreciate it. I was taking a walk with my wife. We live not too far from Lake Michigan. Okay. And I said, you read a lot of mysteries. What's an aspect of mystery stories you enjoy? And she said, when there are two murders and they seem to be separate, but the detective figures out that they're related. And I said, that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah.
And so I set that as my goal. So I invented a Chicago detective Nick Chasm, grew up in a small town near Rockford, but now works for the Chicago Police Department. And he's a very flawed character, intentionally, because flawed characters are interesting. And in the middle of a drug arrest, his mother calls him and says, and she's 82 years old, and she says, my 80-year-old male companion has been murdered, and you have to come up here and solve it. And he tries to get out of it because he doesn't really like going home. There are memories of a bad relationship with his father. They keep him from going home to see his mother, although he calls her every night. And reluctantly, he goes up to Eden Gorge, his hometown, and starts to investigate that murder or that circumstance, and learns that the same night there was a suicide in the place where he used to work. And so he starts investigating.
Okay. That's all you're going to tell us, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it too bad.
That's all right. That's all right. Sounds like a great book, man. I'll tell you what, I love those kind of books. And you sent me another cover. You might as well tell me about that. What is that?
So a year earlier, I released my 9th sci-fi novel called Forward and Back. The protagonist is a physicist working at a laboratory on the outskirts of Chicago. He's named after my high school physics teacher, who passed away a couple of years ago. And he's working on developing heavy protons to kill cancer growths. And he's working at it for 10 years, and his funding is running out. So he's got one last experiment to do, and it's scheduled, unfortunately, on the morning after the night that his wife goes into labor for their first child. And so now he's faced with the dilemma: does he go to do the experiment, or does he stay with his wife? She lets him go to the experiment because the doctor says it'll be hours of labor. And he gets there just a moment too late. The experiment goes awry and sends him 8 years into the future. So at that point, his wife has declared him dead, or the courts have declared him dead. His son was born and is 8 years old, but he's never met him. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have any money. And so he needs to figure out what he's going to do. Is he going to stay 8 years in the future and try to reconcile with his wife? Is he going to try to go back and fix the problem that caused him to leap 8 years forward? And there are some subversive elements. They're trying to get him to do one thing or the other. That's Forward and Back.
All right. That sounds like a good one, too. Now, since you have spent all this time writing about sci-fi, machine learning is a bit like sci-fi. So are you going to do a book about that?
There is a novel I wrote that had I bite my tongue, an artificial intelligence component.
He didn't want to say that.
I didn't want to say that. The book is called Off the Books. It's set in China about 30 years from now. And it's based on an NPR story I heard. They were talking about hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Chinese workers building iPhones and iPads and computers.
Okay.
And I thought, what if, a lot of my novels come from, what if robots took over all their jobs?
Okay.
What is China going to do with 1 million unemployed piece workers?
Uh-huh.
Those people could revolt. They got to give them something to do.
Right.
They decide to turn them into software writers. And they sponsor the formation of companies to write software.
Okay.
So the protagonist in the story is a 20-something-year-old Chinese female, because they say you should write what you know. And it is her life journey from putting in screw number 13 in an iPhone to becoming a software person to being thrown into a project that is way over her skill level, and how she grows into the job.
Okay.
And how she becomes a self-directed person. In the middle of that, there is an AI component.
What's the name of that book?
That is called Off the Books.
Or Off the Books, I already said that. All right, so you're not going to start another book focused on AI and some of these ethical issues that you're concerned about, right?
In fact, I do have one I'm dabbling with.
See, I told you. I knew the topic was there, and you're not going to be able not to deal with it. I know that.
Yeah. When you're dealing with the genre of science fiction, you can't really stay away from it.
Oh, you got an imagination, too. Obviously, you got a hell of an imagination. All right, so people can find your books where? Amazon? Where else?
Yeah. They can take a look at a contest I'm running for the current book at gerfnit.blogspot.com.
How do you spell
that? GERFNIT.blogspot.com. I don't update it frequently, but when I have a contest, that's where I put the contest rules. And if any of your listeners want to write to me, because I love getting email, they can write to me at author@gerfnit.com.
Very good. All right, Michael, it's been great talking to you. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us before we close it up?
No, I wanted to appreciate the opportunity to have a forum to raise at least some of the issues before things get out of hand.
Yeah, okay. We'll fire it out there, and hopefully some people will pay attention. So thanks very much for being with us, Michael. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Now we're going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back with some closing comments. So stay with us. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this podcast and that you'll come back on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that I hope you find interesting, entertaining, and enlightening. Let your friends know about this podcast and take a minute to subscribe. Just go to podcast.leantotheleft.net to subscribe, check out the upcoming interview schedule, and listen to all of our episodes. And follow us on social media. Facebook at the Lean to the Left Podcast, Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at BobGaddy_Lean to the Left, and TikTok at Lean to the Left. And you can watch the episodes at YouTube at Lean to the Left. And don't forget to visit our blog site, leantotheleft.net, where you'll find commentary on the news by some excellent writers with progressive perspectives on a whole range of topics. You can sign up as a member there, and of course, it's all free. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.